Okay, in this video what we're going to do is we're going to go through the Angular Material Design version 10 documentation. We're going to take a look at the stepper component, and we're going to take a look at one example and do a deep dive into the detail of the stepper component as an introduction, and then we're going to go through all aspects of the stepper component in different videos. So I'm on the material.angular.io website. I'm looking at the home page, the material design documentation. I click on components, and basically what I see down here is the stepper component, and I'm going to drill into that to view the documentation. Now, just to point out that there's a component development kit here, which the stepper component might have some foundation classes inside the CDK for it to function. And we'll just briefly mention that. You can go through the CDK documentation yourself. It just provides the foundation for all of these high-level components. So you're probably, from a usage perspective, from a developer's perspective, you just want to take the component, import what's needed, and use it and build your applications. So that's where we are. We're looking at the overview tab of the stepper component, and where we're going to look at this first example here, which will describe what the stepper component is. Now, the stepper component is a wizard-like workflow dividing content into logical steps. I kind of view it as a custom component used for a questionnaire where you can have different steps and submit different values for those steps, and capture the data and submit it, validate it, and use and define some functionality in your application. So let's take a look at this stepper overview. Basically what it is a component which provides you the capability to define steps. And at each step, there's just different functionality. So in this particular first step, I have a form. It says fill out your name. I could fill out my name, and I could go to the next step. Now, this particular step is, at the moment right now, it is a form, and I'm submitting data to the form, and I'm validating the form data, and going to the next form, and filling out some of the data. And at this particular step, I have the data, and I click next, and I go to the next set of data, and it says now you are done. Now, it's a step where it's grabbing data from the user, and there's different functionality and different ways I could customize it. So at this point, I could go back, and I could go forward, and I could continue editing my data and moving forward and backward until I determine that I'm done. Now, this example is a little misleading, because when I'm done here, either I want to submit the data, call the web service, or I want to persist the data, or I want to send an email, whatever I might want to do. There's a reason why I'm asking for this data. There's an action which is going to be associated with doing something with that data. So although it's a very high-level, simple view, that is the goal of the particular component. So now there's different functionalities that you could customize with the stepper. So let's go through a couple of them right now at a very high level, very briefly. First of all, notice, let me refresh the page so I could... as you notice, the icons are showing and the labels are showing, and I have this little button here which I haven't talked about yet, but let's just refresh the page and start from the beginning. Okay, so notice initially the stepper has icons, and the number one is kind of like active at this point. It's showing in blue. It's a number one icon, and notice I have the focus here on this particular tab. And 2 is not highlighted, so you're really not at that step, and 3, etc. the label is to the right of the icon, and could be to the right of the icon or underneath the icon. And so what I want to point out is when you do fill in the data and you go to next, notice the icon here is 1, and what it changes to is that I can now go back and edit. Okay, so this icon now changes. So associated with the icons is a state, and the state determines the icon that's being shown. So think about what's happening here. This icon is showing me I could go back and edit. This icon is showing me it's red, it's number 2. It's showing me that I'm actually at this step. And notice the step is highlighted. Notice if I go here, see the animation that happens here when I click on this thing? That's also a feature. And so there's different features of the front end. Now let me do this. Let me enable this thing called linear mode. So a stepper can be run in linear or non-linear mode. Linear mode means you have to your form that state in your step has to be valid before you move on. So let's suppose I enable linear mode right now, and I tried to go to next. It won't let me because this field needs to be valid. So if I do that and I go to next, then I'm at the second step. And if I try to go to next, it won't let me. Now I could go back and edit this. But I can't move forward with this step because it's not valid. This step 2 has some fields that are valid. Okay, so let's just go through this a little bit. Okay, and now I'm done. Okay, so this is it's sort of like a simple introduction to what a stepper form is. Now, needless to say, questionnaires can get very complex, and you might want a lot of custom functionality. But I'm a strong believer in looking at a component and trying to determine what is all the functionality I could get at this component as far as customizing it, as far as what I'm capable of doing. And so that's the thing we're going to briefly discuss here. Now, this particular form and this particular example, I meant to say this particular stepper widget and this particular example has steps. And each step is a form which is getting validated as you go from step 1 to step 2. And like I said, as you submit these values into the form state, you can grab the state and do whatever you want with it. But I just want to point out that there's different variations of this particular stepper widget. First of all, we're navigating horizontally when in fact you could also navigate vertically. And the only difference there is it's probably more mobile friendly in the vertical variation. The other thing that you got to realize is that you could be submitting data to forms and submitting at each step, or you could use fill in the data and submit all the data at once for the stepper. So there's different things you can use as far as form arrays versus each form for each step. So you could use a single form, or you could use multiple forms. And then the other thing that you should know is if you don't want to use a form group in Angular, what you could do is there's this completed attribute at each step, which you can mark as completed before going on to the next step. And so I kind of think of that as, okay, you're not maintaining state in the forms. You could be doing something asynchronously and making sure your step data is persisted asynchronously before you mark it as complete. So etc. Let's go into this, and like I said, this is the vertical view of the same widget, and it might be more mobile friendly. And what you might want to think about is how to show different stepper variants based on different media queries. Okay, so let's take a deep dive into this code. I wanted to just give you a high-level overview and introduction to the stepper using this example on the documentation. So let's take a look at the code and let's just drill down into it and get a better idea of what this thing is made out of inside the source code. Now the documentation is very nice. It gives you this stackblitz view where you're looking at code and it's rendering on the right hand side, and I'm capable of changing things inside the code and dynamically seeing the Angular code render on the right side. So let's just go through the code snippets here and just make sure we understand what made this work. So here's my little example on the right. Okay, and here's the project code on the left. Okay, so how do you analyze an Angular project? Okay, so the first thing you think about is the workspace associated with this project. It consists of a source folder, and there's these files here which are used for certain things. So the Angular JSON defines the workspace and the project workspace and defines different attributes of your application. The browser list determines which browsers you're supporting. The package.json determines which packages are used for development and production and how to install those packages, etc. And the tsconfig is a TypeScript configuration file which basically says this project is made out of TypeScript, and I'll point to the files and give you the compiler options of what we need to do with the TypeScript, and then there's this tslint file which basically defines some code quality rules that the IDE is going to mandate. So it enables the developer to dynamically fix problems when they exist. Okay, so let's take a look at. I don't want to drag this out too long, but let's take a look at the most important file here, Angular.json. It basically tells me about my project. I have a project here. And it has it defines the source root, the project type, the style of my style sheets, and it shows me some builder options. Ahead of time compilation, transpiling is true. My output path, my build goes into my dist file. And it points to my main program, which is main.ts. So this is important to understand. It also points to my polyfills, and it points to my tsconfig app.json, which is basically just inheriting from the tsconfig JSON, and I could customize it for my particular application. So and then it points to my asset folders, my style sheets, and any scripts. And it has build options for production, and those values might be different. One thing you want to do in production is you want to optimize true. You might output hashing all, which means you're doing some cache busting. You've got your source map as false. You don't want any map files for debugging in production. It's going to slow down the loads, etc. You want to extract your CSS into external files. You want to you could be naming your chunks, and ahead of time transpiling is true. Let's see, anything else here that I should know about? There's this budgets here, which basically defines. Oh, your build optimizer is true. That's an important one. And then you've got you've got these budgets which basically say, well, if I build something and it's too large, I want to know about it. And then you've got your serve, right? And you got a dev server to point to and some configurations. Internationalization configuration, your lint configuration, and when you build, you're excluding your node modules because your package.json is defining what modules you need. You can do an npm install on it and actually install anything you need. And this is the default project, which is the one that we're working in. So this file is very important. I recommend you go through all the attributes, try to understand them. Or just assume that this is the thing which is defining your application and all the associated attributes of your application. And then you got your package.json file, which shows you the different commands you could run to serve, to build, to test, to run end-to-end tests, and your dependencies that you use. So notice we're using Angular 10 here. The RxJS is at version 6.5, and this basically just says we're using Angular with Material Design version 10. I got some things floating around here, which are adopters for dates. If I need them, and then your dev dependencies. You have more dependencies on testing and stuff like that, but it does show me my TypeScript version is 3.9, and my node types is node 12. So it's good to understand this package.json file, but I typically just go here and just say, okay, I'm running Angular 10. What versions of packages am I using? Oh, I'm using RxJS 6.5. Very good. My TypeScript says 3.9. Very good. Okay, and then, like I said, the other files are pretty much and not as important, but this TypeScript, typically out of the box, it does whatever you need it to do. The TypeScript config basically says, this is how I'm going to handle my, this project is made out of TypeScript, and these are the compiler options and attributes that are needed to run my project. So a good exercise would be to print out documentation of TypeScript for tsconfig and all the attributes, and you'll see there's a whole ton of them and what these things mean, and you could move forward with that. Okay, so let's go into the meat of the code. Okay, so basically the angular.json file told me that I have a main.ts file, which is the main file. Now notice one thing I like to do is say Angular is a single page application. So the index.html has a root component, a custom tag that I put in there for this example. And then there might be a style sheet associated with that index.html. So I like drilling down and saying, okay, this is my index.html. I have a stepper overview example. I'm using some material design icons and fonts. So I'm linking to them up here. And so typically in the index, you see the root component embedded inside of the HTML, and then what you look at is say, okay, I got some style sheets here. Oh, I'm pointing to a pre-built theme in the material design, and I'm styling some of the body and some information. Some styles here are being associated with containers, and then I get to the guts of the application. So the angular.json file told me that this is my main module, and the main module basically is importing Angular modules because I need them in my application. So I need certain things which I import. I'm using the HTTP client module, the form module, reactive form module. I'm using some date module, browser animation, and I also import this material, this demo material module. And I love when Google does this, because what they do is they give me my material module here that I could just copy and paste. This is all the material design components that I need in any Angular application. So here it is, copy it, use it. And then also there's this injection token which I'm importing. This thing defines attributes for all the form fields in my application. So it's called a map form field default options token injector, and I list it as a provider down here, so I could define an appearance of fill. Now notice what it means, loosely speaking, is that I'm defining what the form fields look like in the stepper. And so over here, if I put outline, then I get a different look and feel of the form fields. So this injector token basically allows me to consistently define functionality and appearance in my forms consistently throughout my application. Okay, so notice now I import my stepper overview example. That was my root component. The custom tag, the selector custom tag that I used in the index.html, and in my ng modules annotation here, what I do is I import all the modules that I'm using. And then I define my entry components, my declarations of my component I'm using. And this is the root component. In the bootstrap, I actually have to bootstrap the root component, and this is the one that's being rendered here and being shown. So all of this real estate here and the functionality in this view is my stepper overview example component and its associated template rendering on that screen. So that's my app module. Now the only thing I didn't go over, which I really like, is the main.ts is pointing to my app module. And the only thing I didn't really discuss, which I just want to point out very briefly, is the material module that I'm using here. Okay, when you look at the material module, it gives you everything you need out of material design. And so what the heck, you might not be using it all, but here it is. It's very convenient. So when you're developing an application, you go and you're saying to yourself, "Oh, let me add another material component. Let me add another function, another component out of material design." It's better if you have all that stuff, or you'll be changing this all day long as you're updating your code. So this is one material design module that imports everything, every type of module from material design. And then exports it out of the module so your application components can use them. And so typically copy this, call it your own module, and just use it in your application. Okay, so now let's take a look at the main root component. The main root component, like we said, this is the root component that's bootstrapped by the Angular module. This is the root component, and so the root component is importing some things out of Angular core. It's importing the component and the onInit. The component's used as the annotation to define a component. The onInit is basically an interface where you could implement the onInit and define the onInit function, and during the life cycle of the object, the ng onInit would get invoked after the object is constructed. So the constructor constructs the object. The ng on init initializes the state after the object is created. Now, the important thing to realize here is there's some attributes here. I have two different form groups. Now, the first form group is this first step. The second form group is the second step. And what I'm doing is basically saying, you know what, I need two forms that are going to get validated as I navigate through the stepper, going to each step. And I want to make sure that the user experience is good, and at the same time I'm getting what I need to submit valid data to persist or whatever I'm doing with this data. So the first form group is called it's called a form group, and we use the form builder, which actually is a convenience function to return a group of form controls which conveniently define the initial state and the validators associated with those controls. And so this form group has one control called first control with initialized value to be empty, and the validator is required is provided, which means the attribute is required, which is why this thing is showing up red. The is linear being false means I could navigate without validating that form, or let's say I could step to the next step without having the form validate first. Okay, so let's and then there's a second form group, which is a form builder. You use the group function to group a set of controls, which in this case is a second control with initial value of empty with a required validation, and that's the second form group for this particular tab. Okay, and also there's this is linear attribute, which is false. So when the root component gets instantiated, this object gets constructed. The builder, this private form builder in the constructor, TypeScript implicitly puts a reference into the object so you could use it. And so with the this dot underscore form builder, you're referencing that form builder provided by TypeScript, reference inside of the object, and basically your constructor initializes the object with that form builder reference, and then the ng on init gets instantiated, and these form groups get created. And so the state of this object when it gets instantiated is such that there's a state with form groups in it. And notice the act component has a selector called stepper overview example, which is the selector in the index.html that we saw, and there's a template which it's pointing to, which has the tags for this particular component to get rendered, and then there's also a style sheet here, which appears to be CSS at the moment. Okay, so let's take a look. So we know what this object looks like. Let's take a look at the HTML. Now, the HTML looks complicated, but it's not. Okay, so the first thing we look at is there's a button here called Enable Linear Mode. It's a button. There's a directive here called mat raise button, and there's a click function event, which basically uses this. It says if linear, no, the click actually toggles the is linear value. So linear is equal to not linear. It just switches it to true, to false, to true, to false, or whatever. And then there's this ID toggle linear. And the value of the value that's being shown in the button is really decided by this ternary operator. And what it is it says if isLinear negated is true, then display enable linear mode. If it's false, display disable linear mode. So it's just a toggle. And as I click on this button, the value is being replaced in the object instance, true, false, etc. So now here comes the mat horizontal stepper. In my component, in my component, I have this mat horizontal stepper, and let's see this. So this goes all the way down to here. This is where the mat horizontal stepper ends. So so this is the whole stepper, and notice it basically has this this attribute linear being defined as isLinear. So as we toggle this button up here, this value is becoming true and false, etc. This is the value of the variable that's inside of the component instance. Okay, so the component instance has this isLinear value in the component, and it's switching its state, and the mat horizontal stepper can get that state and use it. So up at this level, the mat horizontal stepper is where we're defining whether each form in each step has to get validated before moving forward. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now this is a hashtag stepper. It's sort of a reference to the mat horizontal stepper, and it's used down here when where is it used? When we reset the stepper. Okay, so if we go, let me disable this. If I do go here, and I go next, and I go next, and then now I do a reset. This reset is making a reference to the stepper, which is this component. And it's resetting this state. When that happens, it basically resets the state of all the forms. Okay, so let's move on. So it's very simple that the mat horizontal stepper has mat steps. Okay, step 1, step 2, step 3. And I'm defining what these things look like for each step. When I'm saying, okay, the first mat step has a step control to be the first form group. What I'm saying is, I want my step control to be associated with my form group, my first form group, and that first form group does have validation rules. And so when I point this step control to the form group, I'm actually making a specification that I am managing this step with a form. And so we talked about the mat step having step controls, which are pointing to form groups, but there's also the capability of not using a form group, and we talked about using the completed attribute and doing things a little bit more ad hoc, which might be necessary if you're doing something very complex and you want that level of flexibility. Okay, so this mat step has a form group, and so the form tag points to the form group, and the form basically is the first form group, and I have a template in the form which has the label of this step, so here, this ng template is used to say, okay, there's a directive here called mat step label, which basically says I'm using this template to basically use as my label for this particular step of my stepper. And so I have this. Notice how this is getting cut off over here, which is very interesting, because the thing that disturbs me is the mobile view of this thing I'm not liking it, which means if I wanted to use the vertical stepper here, you know, these steps would go down in a vertical direction, and I wouldn't see this truncation here. It's just an observation. And how to flip from the horizontal to the vertical in different media queries. We should investigate and try to figure out how to do that, because I don't want to be writing two sets of tags. I want to be able to do something a little bit more dynamic. Okay, so let's zoom in. We already talked about this label. If I change this thing just to show you, it changes the label. Okay, so let's go back to that. Now there's a form field here with a mat label. Now this thing is really defining the form, and the mat form field has a mat label which says name, which appears here. The input it has this directive mat input, and is a placeholder, which basically is this last name, first name, etc. And it's the input is associated with a form control name, which says first control. So this input field is going to be pumped into this first control attribute. Okay, so let's go back into this thing. The first control is this attribute. So the point I'm trying to make is that this step has a form group, and the form group has a field, and this field has a form control name, and that form control name is being mapped into this first control value. So notice this is, I didn't initialize this. I didn't initialize this value, but I could have. Usually when you instantiate it, you want it to be empty. And then when you submit the form with this next button, the value would go into the form field. Now, keep in mind here that the mat button here, the button which has this directive mat button, and it has mat stepper next. Now this mat stepper next is the directive, and it's saying this form in the next button, in this button, I want the mat horizontal stepper to validate this particular form before moving forward. So the mat stepper button, the mat horizontal stepper work in conjunction with each other, as well as the linear mode, non-linear mode, to figure out what to do to manage the navigation of this form. Right? If I click enable and I click next, well, the mat stepper, the mat horizontal stepper is saying, what is this value? What is this action? What should I do now? And so the stepper is saying, you can't move to the next. You can't move to the next step. You got to fill out this name now. So we do that. So just pointing out that there's a lot of things being done behind the scenes with the this material design component, the stepper component, and some of it is being done by the inherited classes from the CDK stepper to provide some of that base functionality. Okay, so this is so I think we understand what the step does. and we understand what the stepper is doing for us with this form. And if you look at the second step, it's very similar. The second step is the same. There is a difference here. There is a previous button, and there's a next button. And so if you do go to you're in linear mode here, so if you do go here and you want to go next, the stepper is saying no, you cannot. If you want to go back, the stepper is saying yes, you could edit. So there's that difference there, that you have two buttons, but it's pretty much the same thing. In this particular case, the step control says I'm using a form group. The form says my state's going into a form group. My ng template for my mat step label saying fill out your form address. Fill out your address, and you got your form field with a label. Your input is a mat input with form control pointing to that second control attribute in my second form group. Right? Form group has an attribute, second control. This form control name says when you submit this value, put it into that, put the value into this form control name attribute in the form group and validate it. Notice this does say required. And so let's just wrap this up because we're pretty much done with this example. And then the last step doesn't really do much. It just basically it gives you the ability to go back or reset the form. And like I said, you're using the reference of the component to reset, and so that's pretty much it. So let's see, is there anything else that I missed out? The only thing you got to realize here is that okay, so let's just wrap this example up. What we want to do is just talk about this small example. We discussed linear mode versus nonlinear. We talked about the labels, the icons. Notice the default behavior of the icons. I didn't have to define anything for icons. It used this default behavior, and we had the ability to use separate forms and do validation for the forms, and at the end result we had these form groups full of state data that we could do anything we want to do with. So that was the point of the particular demo, was just to go through that example. The initial stepper overview, simple.